This is a story about how a video game changed my life. It wasn't sudden, I didn't experience an epiphany while playing it, and I didn't become some sort of public figure in its community overnight. However, I did experience a tremendous amount of change over the course of some formative years spent engrossed within it. I've turned to video games for different reasons during different stages of my life. As a child, I simply played what was given to me. As a teenager with more choices and no worry for time, I lost myself in fantastical worlds that I explored for hundreds of hours. As an adult with limited time and responsibilities to fulfill, I've come to seek a different kind of experience, one dependent on its value proposition. I wouldn't even argue that this habit is a healthy one, but it's a hard one to not get caught up with in an ever-expanding market of esport careers and content creators. This perceived value has appeared in many different forms, but none have, and perhaps ever will, top the value offered from one single game. By pure circumstance, there was once a time I found myself so embedded in its community that creating a career from it seemed possible. I gave it almost everything I had in order to turn that fantasy into a reality, but I failed. However, when I look back at that time now, instead of failure, I see growth. A game that was never meant to be more than an excuse to spend some extra time bonding with friends contributed to not only my personal development, but also my professional life in a way I'll never forget. Before I even had as much as an inkling of how important a role it would play in my life, I made a promise to myself that I would one day express how incredible it truly is. So here we go. This is how I became a leader by playing Overwatch.
All shattered behind the wall.
You kinda goated!
Having never experienced a Blizzard-developed game or tactical shooter before it, I went into Overwatch with the blankest of expectations. All I knew was that I liked the character designs and the idea of playing the hot new multiplayer game with all my friends. I still remember the very first match I played, Route 66 Defense. I picked Hanzo because he looked cool, and I figured that if I didn't grasp his wider moveset, worst case scenario, I could resort to simply spamming arrows in the enemy's direction. And damn was it fun. Despite my inexperience with aiming in first person with a mouse and keyboard, I managed to have a significant impact on the game, probably because we were all terrible at it. From that point on, I was hooked, but not long after, I became a little frustrated with my experience. For one, my goals quickly fell out of alignment with the rest of the group I was consistently playing with. For a lot of them, playing Overwatch was no more than a means of hanging out with friends, but for me, it began to fill a void in my adult life left by a lack of competition. I've always been a competitive person, driven by passion, and in the early days of Overwatch, this caused some friction in the friend group. When Season 1 of Overwatch's competitive mode released, the group dynamic often shifted from a relaxed, carefree gathering to a matter of seriousness and high stakes. I think we all knew that winning was much more fun than losing, but to each player, the value of that collective loss weighed differently. As the hungriest player in the lobby, I took it upon myself to gather a deeper understanding of how to play the game effectively, seeking knowledge from more experienced players while applying what I learned to my own game. From my point of view, the team lacked direction and cohesion, resulting in countless frustrating losses with little potential for improvement, so I tried to take control. Looking back, I can admit that this level of control varied from mildly suggesting hero swaps to rudely shutting down side conversations in game, so I understand why my friends were upset by this. In a solo queue environment, it's not terribly difficult to move on from a bad loss, but in a pre-made group, that tension between players lingers game after game, often resulting in more stress than fun. Ultimately, the first lesson I learned was a tough one. Trying to lead in an environment filled with mismatched goals is an effort typically headed for failure. Some may have stopped there, and many of my friends did as they realized the competitive experience wasn't one they were particularly interested in anymore, but I was still hungry, and the taste of knowledge and strategy I was exposed to early on deepened my desire to improve and see the full extent of what Overwatch had to offer me. So I did the only thing I could do. I ventured forth into the welcoming, integrous, and respected world known as the Overwatch solo queue experience. These early days were the Wild West of Overwatch. Before there was 222 roll lock, a halt on new hero releases, and even hero limits, you could get away with playing just about anything. There were certainly metas developing at the highest levels of play, but instances of the mass player base copying these strategies were much more limited than they are today. What ended up dominating the latter was comfort and expertise in hero picks and team compositions. And this was almost at odds with the development team's intentions when designing how hero swapping would work in Overwatch. The fluidity of swapping heroes before and after the start of a match was meant to encourage players to adapt to certain situations by understanding how to play heroes across a wide variety of roles. However, the smartest players realized early on that the most effective strategy was to play to their strengths by specializing in a small group of heroes with transferable skill sets. I was not one of those players. From the beginning of my exposure to competitive play, my desire to win in the short term trumped any desire to play what heroes I liked or understood the most. So I dubbed myself the almost memeable title looking back, known as Flex Player. And in those days, being a Flex Player usually just meant that you played main tank. If you haven't played Overwatch since launch, or only have a basic understanding of how it's played, you might not know that the competitive community has categorized certain groups of heroes more specifically than the broadly defined roles of tank, damage, and support. These categorizations are typically determined by assessing a hero's role within most team compositions, as well as their synergy with others. Like how main supports like Lucio and Mercy don't offer much utility to each other, but work well with certain flex supports, like Ana, Zenyatta, or Moira. Some of these groupings are commonly misunderstood, but none have been more rigid than the separation of off tanks and main tanks. While off tanks are equipped with more supportive abilities, main tanks are often the tip of the spear, relying on their engagement tools and facilitation of the team's ability to reposition around the map. Anytime you've been begged to swap from a hero like D.Va or Zarya to something with a more general purpose shield like Reinhardt, Orisa, or Winston, it's because the game is more organized and simply works better when at least one of these heroes are in play. Despite this, main tank has become an increasingly less popular role over time, due to the inherent design of its heroes in the face of many other heroes designed to counter them. I think this makes the most sense when you compare the entire cast of heroes along the same spectrum, with damage at the center, more commonly referred to as DPS. With heroes like Zarya and Roadhog in the tank category, whose impact relies heavily on their mechanical output and moment-to-moment decision-making, DPS players are more likely to gravitate to them when they have to play tank. Likewise, leaning towards more mechanically based support heroes like Ana and Zenyatta. This leaves the pool of potential players willing to play main tank and main support heroes much smaller than the former, which is why I initially took up the role of main tank. Playing main tank even requires a certain type of mindset that is unattractive to many types of players. For one, as the tip of the spear, main tanks are often the first to make decisions in teamfights based on the information at their disposal. Because Overwatch is a first-person game, the frontline often makes decisions based on an expectation that their teammates behind them will be in a position to follow up, rather than being able to see someone else's actions and react accordingly. There's a lot of trust involved, which is why the role can be very frustrating, especially when after 5 years of play, players have gotten much better at punishing aggressive mistakes. I initially found comfort playing this role while developing my skills on Winston. My Reinhardt was pretty weak due to my over-aggression and tunnel vision on the hero, but with Winston, I could better utilize my recently acquired strengths, cooldown management, and map awareness. My Winston had more of an individualistic playstyle, which mitigated the need to communicate in an environment I wasn't exactly comfortable in yet. However, as I began to rise through the ranks, I realized that my mastery of Winston's abilities and my developing Reinhardt weren't enough to carry games like they did before. So I tried something different. Instead of focusing solely on honing my mechanics, I shifted towards developing my communication skills. Overwatch is such a fast-paced game that a lot of plans need to be made on the fly, often in response to the enemy team. By learning map terminology and simplifying my callouts, I discovered how effective concise communication was at getting everyone on the same page. I even made a rule for myself requiring all of my mid-fight callouts to be made with the least amount of syllables necessary to get my point across. The lack of extra words and syllables meant that I could repeat these short phrases over and over with the different levels of urgency depending on how important the call was. With upwards of 6 people talking over each other in a game of Overwatch, you start to realize pretty quickly how necessary it is to repeat yourself. I've never been the most mechanically gifted player, so finding a strategy that played to my strengths while working around my limitations was super liberating. But I still had a lot to learn because effective communication doesn't begin and end at concise callouts. Over the course of a few competitive seasons, my rank climbed from low diamond to just out of earshot of my goal, Grandmaster. The closer and closer I got to GM, the hungrier I was. This was when Overwatch became more than just another game to play, presenting me with an opportunity with value to extract. I started playing Overwatch just for fun, but after I was exposed to the world of Overwatch streaming, I began to envy the players I watched and learned so much from. I viewed them as authority figures in the community, and naively attributed the viewer count of their streams to their rank. Having a background in streaming myself, I saw my rapid improvement as an opportunity to grow my stream, a long-time goal that for so long seemed so unattainable. I just had to get to Grandmaster. Thus began the long mental battle and love-hate relationship with Overwatch. During this time, I learned a lot about the mental game of Overwatch. Not only did I struggle with toxic teammates, but I struggled to deal with the toxicity brewing inside myself, emerging in the form of retaliatory shit talk. While I made it a point to never make personal attacks, Overwatch made me realize just how much stock I was putting into other people's perception of me. It was around this time that Overwatch League made its debut, my first exposure to Overwatch esports. I quickly fell in love, drawn to the personalities of the players, following their streams, even learning the names of their alternate accounts. Then I began getting placed into the same lobbies as them. You see, Overwatch matchmaking gets a little tricky in the higher skill thresholds. Because the pool of players becomes smaller and smaller the higher you climb, as a master-ranked player with little to no team play experience, you can be pulled up into higher-rated lobbies filled with professional players and streamers whose job is to play Overwatch. And the difference in skill level is insane. Good players don't typically make personal attacks, but they will attack your skill level. And I had some bad run-ins with some players I had a lot of respect for. Looking back, I don't hold it against them, but at the same time, this did a number on my confidence. I felt like I didn't belong in these lobbies, shutting down in my communication as a result. I just couldn't bring myself to articulate my plans to professional players that clearly understood the game on a much deeper level than I did, losing the skill that defined me as a main tank player. I found myself making out of character and unpredictable decisions in an attempt to follow their lead when they were really just focused on their own game. Combined with the fact that I was struggling to deal with meta shifts away from my comfort picks at the time, just when I had reached my first peak, I was suddenly thinking of quitting altogether. While I was on the verge of finally reaching Grandmaster for the first time, there was one season that featured a meta dominated by Orisa, and I found myself getting punished hard on all of my comfort picks. It wasn't even the fact that I was particularly uncomfortable with the hero, I just hated playing her over and over again. And every time I believed I could outplay the enemy with Winston and Reinhardt, I ended up feeding my brains out, tilting half of the lobby. The fact of the matter was, I grew too comfortable in my playstyle, and my adaptability suffered as a result. And the reason this was so demoralizing was because I was giving so much to Overwatch. My real life had become stagnant, and to distract from that, my sense of self-worth was tied to my skill in a video game and the often arbitrary label that came with it. When that steadily growing number I used to determine my self-worth took a lurch in the opposite direction, it kind of broke me. It's embarrassing to admit how wrapped up I was in this game, but I cared so deeply about it because I was watching an opportunity slip through my fingers I attributed so much value to. At this point, I was lost. My confidence shattered, as my understanding of the game as a whole was in question. Then I did something that shifted my entire perspective of Overwatch. I started playing D.Va. I remember looking back at my statistics for Season 8 in a desperate attempt to find some positive takeaway from such a disastrous season, and I noticed something interesting. While my two most played heroes, Winston and Orisa, suffered from a mere 40% win rate, my D.Va's win percentage was as high as 70%. I enjoyed D.Va a fair bit whenever I got the chance to play her, so with nothing to lose at that point, I made the decision to switch to off-tank. And it was exactly the kind of refresh I needed. After months of feeling like I was either yelling into the void or completely shutting down, lost in the pace of the game, I finally felt like I could catch my breath, follow the lead of my teammates for once, and utilize my knowledge to react to the enemy's decisions rather than get caught up in them. Better yet, I found all of the off-tank heroes super rewarding to play, and it felt like I was learning again. With my passion reignited and skill trajectory on the rise, I realized something incredibly important. So important that it was not only integral to improving my performance in Overwatch, but also in my real life. Confidence is everything. I could form a plan and communicate everything I did, but if I didn't think it would work or believe in my own ability to execute it, it would surely fail. And that's what happened when my confidence was shattered while playing main tank. I stopped believing in myself. While I didn't realize it at the time, shifting roles was a turning point for me both in Overwatch and my life outside of the game. During my time spent playing main tank, I was just as lost and confused in my real life, looking back at decisions I'd made with regret, wondering what could have been if I had the guts to step outside of my comfort zone. Overwatch began to feel like a parallel to my real life, and at this point, I was on the cusp of big change. After months of grinding the ranked ladder, by pure circumstance, I was approached by a random player with the opportunity to try out for my first team. Little did I know this opportunity would open the door to so many friendships and experiences in Overwatch I will never forget. While the team went through a few different iterations of players, we eventually settled on a group of guys that had an enormous impact on me, and I can't imagine myself ever playing on another team without them. First, our main tank Luey, a budding prospect with an incredible amount of potential. He was one of the most level-headed, welcoming, and silliest players on the team, as well as a natural at easing tension. He's just one of those guys that's always a joy to be around, often drawing out the best in people. Also, the pride and power of UT Dallas esports. Whatever that means.
His team needs him the most. UTD taking a lot of damage. Coalescence!
Nice.
It's a 6-man shatter for Luey! UTD swinging away the chances!
Following Luey was Symbs, our hot-headed hit-scan DPS. His mechanical skill and aggression was unmatched on our team, but what I found to be even more valuable than his skill was his vocal playstyle. He knew how to take control and was no stranger to debate, challenging myself and the rest of us to understand the game from a wider variety of perspectives.
Tiring from spawn! Go, go, go! Get on the point!
Next were our flex DPS players, starting with Wintertime. Winter simultaneously knew how to get under my skin and make me laugh harder than anyone else on the team. And much like Symbs, he knew exactly what he wanted to do and communicated it very clearly. Absolute beast on his specialist heroes we brought him in for. Rounding out the DPS trio was Nimbus. To be frank, Nimbus had a lot of streaky performances, and I know his confidence in himself and his position in the team took hits at times. But when he popped off hard. And I don't think I can name a better teammate, going the extra mile to organize our practices and matches. An absolutely selfless player, we certainly would not have remained a team without him. Last, but certainly not least, were our supports, starting with Nistrik, our flex support. I don't think I've ever played with a more rawly talented player than Nistrik. If there was one player on our team I thought could go pro in Overwatch, it's this guy. While he exuded confidence in his play, ego never got in the way, as he always kept his cool. Finally, there's Brick, our main support. I can honestly say I've never met another person that talks more than Brick, to the point where I can literally stop listening to what he's saying in a conversation and just respond with one-word answers, and he'll just keep talking. Easily the cockiest player on the team, he's also one of the biggest tilters I've ever played with. But he's also indispensable. What I'll never tell him to his face is how much I envy his unwavering confidence in his play and his teamfight planning. He's a one-of-a-kind player, never afraid to be wrong in the face of tough decision-making. He's also my longest-standing friend in the Overwatch scene, and I can thank him for just about all of my competitive opportunities. Then there's me, the off-tank. When it came time to determine my role in the team, I did what I'd done for most of my Overwatch career. I filled the role that needed to be filled, one that I imagine is pretty natural for an off-tank player. All of our players were quite vocal. An aspect of our team I felt was pretty unique, so I realized early on that it needed a player who would listen. I'd listened to Symbs and Luey's target calls, Brick's ultimate tracking and fight planning, and Nistrik's calls for help in the backline. And when those calls went quiet, I knew I had to step up. Using the communication skills I learned while grinding the ranked ladder, I conveyed my needs quickly and effectively, making sure to hold my teammates to the same standard. Even if I was out of the team fight at hand, I'd remind them to keep focus and continue calling out targets and ultimate usage, even from the spawn room in a lot of cases. I think because I was the oldest player on the team and chose to speak the loudest during the most critical moments, my teammates looked upon me as a different kind of leader, an emotional leader. In the interest of being impartial to myself, I recently asked a few of them how they viewed me as a teammate, and one thing proved to be clear. I held teammates accountable. Months of grinding on my own led me to believe that I could always, and should always, strive to be better. And if I were to dedicate an overwhelming amount of time to a goal shared by this random group of guys I met in a video game who didn't even know my real name at the time, they better be doing the same for me. But this wasn't just about judging someone's effort or telling people what to do. It was about boosting morale and keeping the momentum rolling. Remarkably, I was never this type of leader growing up. I was always a listener and role player, but Overwatch brought something out of me buried deep inside. The confidence and drive to stand up and take control of a situation. It felt sudden, but in reality, a transformation was occurring over the course of many months spent dedicated to the game. This was one of the most rewarding periods of my Overwatch career. No longer was the desire to become a big live streamer my motivation to grind this game for hours every day. Instead, it was to give my best effort to 6 other players and friends who believed in me and our team. I was used to failing myself. I was used to setting lofty goals that didn't align with the effort level I was willing to put in. I was used to becoming bored with something I once felt incredibly passionate about before moving on to something else not even remotely similar. What I wasn't used to was being accountable to the success of other people I cared about. And learning that was the environment I thrived in was a life-changing event. Team play Overwatch is a beautiful thing. It's not like queuing up for a couple games of ranked where nobody uses their mics besides you and the one other person who wants to call you a slur because of how you sound or how you didn't play to their expectations. It's not repeatedly bashing your head against the wall as you fail to pass through a choke point as a cohesive unit without using all of your ultimates at once. It's about gathering a group of passionate players dedicated to achieving a goal. It's about supporting and enabling your teammates, playing to their strengths and around their weaknesses. It's about communication. It's about trust. It's about leadership. And we were the Apes. Apes together strong. I loved playing for this team, but unfortunately, I wasn't able to keep up this grind for too much longer. While the goal to reach the professional level was in the back of my mind, part of me knew I was unlikely to succeed. It is incredibly understated how much of a physical toll your body takes in pursuit of an esports career as a player. Putting in the necessary amount of hours meant playing video games all day and into the night, which did a number on my sleep schedule. And this only led to my inconsistencies as a player. After many sleepless nights, I experienced what I would call brain lag. Something I can only describe as a lack of coordination between my brain and my hands. Combined with some poor decision making, this caused my mechanical skill to suffer tremendously, requiring large amounts of time spent warming up that I didn't have, as matches were often scheduled early in the morning. Just when I felt I had got going, the match would be over, resulting in me taking personal blame for some tough losses. Combined with the fact that long sessions of play always left me with tension-induced pain in my shoulders and neck, it became harder and harder to go on without feeling like I was dragging down my team. I was getting older, my responsibilities were piling up, and our team wasn't producing tangible results. Then, I was given an opportunity. Not an Overwatch opportunity, but a real-life one. At my job, a leadership position had opened up, and it was mine if I wanted it. I'd received opportunities to move up in the company before, but never acted on it because I didn't believe the conditions were conducive to a healthy mental well-being. However, things were different this time. We were under new management, and I was working much harder to impress them because I'd finally begun to receive recognition for my effort, something missing from this job before then. This time, I was ready. The only problem with taking the position was that my schedule wouldn't allow me to play with the team any longer. I spent a whole week just thinking about it, weighing up the value of continuing with Overwatch versus beginning the next chapter of my life. In the end, I turned the page. For the sake of my future, my family, and my mental health, I believed I had to leave Overwatch behind. But that didn't make things any easier. I immediately felt out of place in my new position, trying to figure out how to delegate and gain the respect of my peers. Questioning my decision, every day. I remember trying to stay involved with the team in any way I could, filling in as a sub or spectating their practices to give feedback. But it wasn't the same. I felt like an outsider in both aspects of my life, a feeling eerily similar to past moments of regression, failing to adequately deal with uncomfortable situations and get outside of my comfort zone. But something within pushed me to continue. This is the part where you're probably expecting me to say that all of the lessons I learned while playing Overwatch flooded back to me, giving me the strength to move forward. Well, sort of, but not exactly. There was no epiphany. It wasn't a conscious realization, because rarely in life is there actually a moment where you have this realization that solves all your problems. In reality, playing Overwatch for years silently molded me into the person that refused to run away when the situation became uncomfortable or difficult. In this new position, I was responsible for the success of our business, our team. I stepped up into a broken system, hoping to fix it with the guidance of my mentor. My decisions had a visible impact on the well-being of my employees and my bosses. If I left, I would have failed them, and failing them was out of the question, because fixing the system and providing people with a healthy place to work became my purpose. Every day was a new hurdle, and some were so challenging I did consider leaving, but on those bad days, seeing the faces of young staff members light up when they realized their leadership actually cared about them kept me going. It was the same euphoric feeling I felt while playing Overwatch with the Apes, when I refused to give up when they were depending on me. I still had a lot to learn about leadership in the workplace, but Overwatch gave me a foundation to build off of. I'd already learned how important it was to keep everyone on the same page, making sure the goals of the staff were in line with those of the leadership. I'd learned not only how to communicate orders effectively, but how to communicate in a way that our staff members would respond to positively. I had learned to stop taking things personally when someone disagreed with my decision, displaying confidence and conviction in my plans. I had learned when to stop speaking and listen, and when it was necessary to follow someone else's lead. It was in that building where I lived up to my potential. I refused to fail because of my accountability to others. I could not give up because my new boss had begun working so hard to fix that system, and she needed my help. And for 2 years, we worked damn hard. The advent of COVID-19 has since rocked that boat. Our business was no longer sustainable under these circumstances, shutting down for the better part of a year, and just about everyone I know of has had to move on, ending yet another pivotal chapter of my life. Since then, I've done a lot of thinking about who I was before and after I've walked through those doors with a new uniform and title. Truthfully, I can't give a video game all the credit, but every decision I've made surrounding it has played a role in building the person I am today. Playing to win pushed me to fill the role that needed to be filled. Filling that role forced me to improve my communication and confidence. Failing in that position caused me to shift my perspective. Shifting my perspective gave me the opportunity to play in a real team. Playing within that team introduced me to an environment I was built to thrive in. These decisions have had a ripple effect on my life. Without Overwatch, my life may have remained as stagnant as it was before. I may not have taken the position that began one of the most important chapters of my life. I may not have met the love of my life in that place. I may not have come back to creating videos like these after a years-long hiatus. Without Overwatch, I may not be here. I'm not sure exactly what the next step is for me. While I was still working, I had a brief stint coaching a collegiate Overwatch team my friend Brick belonged to. The fact that I kept at it for as long as I did with no pay or benefits still astounds me. But what's clear is that I loved it enough to come home from an 8-hour shift of leading just to hop on my computer and lead some more. I even took an 8-hour trip in a car full of complete strangers to accompany the team for an offline event. I think that was the moment I realized that my calling in life was to help people. Watching them grow from shy players, unsure of their abilities, to confident teammates, unafraid of putting others before them, fueled a drive to see others grow in the same way I did. Whether or not I end up in a similar position in the future, I know in one way or another, I'll always be thankful for the one video game that changed my life.